The Naked DJs podcast. Are they really naked? We know they expose themselves every day just so they can bring you the best of music. They like to stick it out there for everyone to hear. You can hear their podcast on Anchor.fm, YouTube, and any of your favorite podcast platforms. Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking all things mental health and trauma as I am joined by author, professional mental health coach, podcaster, and combat veteran, Dylan Sessler. Dylan, his big platform is Tik Tok, and he has lots of followers, and he uses that platform to talk about mental health and trauma. So I've invited him to the show today to tell his story and talk about that with you, the great listeners. So Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Curtis. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So recently in the recent, last 2 years, I became, I guess, a public figure in some way with TikTok. I've gained over 575,000 followers at this point, and just talking about mental health. I really started my journey in March of 2020, talking about suicide, mental health, trauma, trying to help people understand what it's like to overcome these things and what it really takes to stick it out and keep going. And the reason I kind of got started was back in 1996, I was 6 years old. I lost my dad to suicide. And that monumental moment in my life was kind of the building block of my own journey in understanding trauma. I didn't understand it back then. Found myself in a lot of different situations, like child abuse from the next man, bullying in high school. I found myself engaged in war. I joined the military at 17 years old just to get away from everything, but also to chase my own death. And I found myself in Afghanistan a couple of years later, not able to actually find that. I saw just about everything else I could see, but I didn't find myself. I didn't find my own death there. And I came home and I struggled with PTSD. I didn't know it. Didn't understand it at the time, even though people told me outright that, you're probably struggling with PTSD, and I just didn't listen to people. And I came home, tore my ACL while I was on active duty, and I was sent down to Fort Knox, and I struggled alone there. I was put into a medical unit basically to recover from my injury for 8 months, and it was, I was probably one of the hardest times of my life because I was sleeping for 1 hour a day maximum. And I was thinking alone for 23 hours a day. And I ended up finally getting out of there. I don't know how. In some ways, I struggled my way through it, and ultimately found my way back home as a member of the National Guard, and continued to go to school up until 2015 when I nearly committed suicide myself because of the culmination of everything. And I really found a moment in my life where I had to legitimately take stock of what was happening to me, my own self-awareness, and ask the question that ultimately brought me here to you, and what I do now. And that was, why am I here? Why am I in this place at this moment right now? And then I spent the next, 7 years getting to here, answering that question and digging into the hardest truths that I could dig into, without without deceiving myself like I had been for 20 years before that. So ultimately, that's a short version of my story, but that's what's brought me here. It's given me the experience and the wisdom to kind of look back and see all of that allows me to help people and understand people in a way that a lot of people struggle with. And so that's what I do is I open up people like I opened up myself, and I give them no judgment. I don't have the right to judge anyone. So I certainly don't. And I just give them the opportunity to share in a place that is abundantly safe, which a lot of people need right now. So that's my story.
Well, tell us about as much as you can remember or what you understood when your dad took his life at 6 years old. I'm sure that had to be a real traumatic experience.
It was, I remember coming downstairs one day, and it was August 11th. He died on August 12th. I'm sorry. It was August 12th, the morning of August 12th. I came downstairs, and I remember my mom and my sister in the kitchen with my dad. And I remember my dad kind of proclaiming, like, I've got a meeting today. I'm not going to be home until late tonight or even tomorrow. And so don't wait up for me. And when he started kind of talking about this, I immediately had this deep sense of just bad feelings. Like my gut was turning on. I just remember the visceral sensations of that's not true, of listening to him. And that's what I was saying to myself. And I sat with that for a second, and then I immediately kind of ran to him and clung to him, and I told him not to go. And I remember that emotional kind of outburst as a 6-year-old, not knowing anything but what this feeling was telling me. And I knew it was different, right? It wasn't like a, that normal 6-year-old, like 6-year-olds never want parents to go, but this was different. And certainly it became a lot different as I remember that feeling. I grabbed his leg, and he was 6'6" at the time. I was not, as a 6-year-old, and he simply grabbed me, pulled me off, and said, I love you. I'll see you later, or something. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I do remember him saying, I love you. And I remember that cliche kind of walk out the door, and take a left, and that was it. That's what I remember from the day. But I remember the morning after, my mom waking me up in a rush and telling me we have to go to our grandparents' house. And that's where I found out. And it was that feeling that always stuck with me after that. It was the sensation that I knew he wasn't coming home, or my body did. Whether my mind knew it or not, my body certainly was trying to inform me that what he was saying was a lie. And, at that point, when I found out he had committed suicide, I blamed myself. I was 6 years old. And so it felt natural to simply blame myself and take on the guilt of that. And then as I learned more about suicide, I also learned, from people who didn't necessarily know how to expose this to a child. I was exposed to the shamefulness of suicide back then. It was obviously in the 90s. And so not only did I take on guilt, but I also took on shame of what my father did, as well as the shame of not being able to expose that I might have been the problem, because I knew he wasn't coming home. And so those feelings became more or less foundational in my life, and they became a centralized struggle for me that I never exposed to anybody until well into my 20s. Even after my own suicide attempt, I never told anybody about them, probably until 2016 or 2017.
Well, talk about your story when you thought that you wanted to take your own life. Tell us kind of what led up to that and how that, I guess, not how it was, but how your dad's suicide played a part in that, if it did.
Yeah, it did. It certainly did. But I would say in quite the opposite way of what I expected. I was going to school at Whitewater at the time, and when I came out of school that day, it was just not a good day. A month prior, I had broken up with my ex-girlfriend. I was struggling through just the difficulties of PTSD, and I had never been diagnosed before. But there was always that anxiety. There was always that depression. There was always that feeling of something's going wrong somewhere, or someone is trying to hurt me, or something's not good. Because I'd gotten home from Afghanistan 3 years ago, or 2 years ago at that point. And it was still there. It was that feeling was still there of I'm gonna die, or someone's gonna try and kill me, or something like that. And I was exhausted. My body had been not only carrying the weight of the shame, the regret, the guilt of my father, the child abuse, the bullying, war, the injuries I had sustained. And at that point, this was 2015, so it was my third ACL reconstruction, or my second ACL reconstruction. My third ACL surgery was about to happen in like 2 months, and so at that point, I was just defeated. I was tired. I was done. But at the same time, I wasn't looking at it like that. I was looking at it like I'm causing all of these people, all of these problems, and that really centralized around my girlfriend my ex-girlfriend. And I found myself, I left school, drove 25 minutes home, and was just, I was crying. I was defeated. I was crushed by all of this. And I got home, and I, ultimately made the decision. This is it. I had made a decision when my dad died that I was never going to commit suicide. I was never going to be like him. And 19 years later, I couldn't hold that rule to be true anymore. And I decided that was what I was going to do. I was going to end my life that day. And I pulled out my Glock 34. I don't know why I went out in the hallway, but I went out in the hallway and I sat down and I just cried. I contemplated it for a long time. I picked where I was gonna do it, and I was gonna shoot myself right behind the ear. And I remember thinking about this and thinking about I'm gonna shoot my medulla oblongata, because that's the only thing. I'm a soldier, so I know these things. That's the only place in the human body that's an automatic shut off switch. You end that, you feel nothing. No one's gonna. People might miss me, but I'm doing them a favor. I cause too many problems. I don't solve any problems. I just make more of them. And when I cocked the gun to put the round in the chamber, I put it to my skin. And when I felt that barrel on my skin, it was a moment of incredibly deep reflection. It was a moment of understanding what my father had actually felt that day. Because you got to understand that my dad was an alcoholic, a bad one. He was I would say borderline addicted to drugs, addicted to tobacco for sure, severely manic depressive, bipolar in some ways. And so this is a man who deeply struggled with a lot of things. He had a lot of childhood trauma. He was abused as a child by an alcoholic father. And I compared myself to him probably for the first time, because I had never really looked at the difference between us. And, for the first time I looked at that and I was like, I'm not like that. I'm a soldier that has given a lot to this country. I've given a lot to other people, and if I do this, I'm just not that person that he was. I haven't been through these things. I've been through other things. And ultimately the question came out of, why am I doing this? And why did he do it? And ultimately that the answer came and, came to my mind of, we're remarkably similar, but we were in different situations. He was a father. I wasn't, I was a soldier. He wasn't. And, he was an addict in many ways and I wasn't, an alcoholic and I wasn't. And so I had to really look and understand that I just wasn't causing the problems that he was causing. Certainly I might have been causing other ones, but I wasn't him. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't him. And yet that was the closest it felt I had ever felt like I was understanding him in some way. And that was a deep moment for myself. It was a deep situation for me to actually realize I get it. I get why he chose that. But at the same time, I can't do this. I can't do this to other people because he did that to me. And that's when everything kind of started to change and started to transform for me.
Well, talk about the mental health system. There are starting to be more programs out there, but how do you feel like the system is doing to help people? The system is overburdened and all that stuff. So what do you think?
It's hard to say, because if I've learned anything in the last 2 years, it's that this job is hard, right? It's in many ways, it's damn near impossible. And so the mental health system is what it is, right? It's a system built to try and do its best, but in many ways it's outdated for some people. Not everybody has the same access to what's working right now. Not everybody has access to information, right? Not everybody has access to that stuff, and not everybody has access. That's just talking about the system, but not everybody has access to the system itself for a number of different reasons, because of stigma, because of money, because of insurance. And so it's really hard to say the system is bad. But it's also really hard to say that the system is good, because there's this historic trend of utilizing pharmaceuticals to treat mental health, when the reality is that there needs to be probably a lot more of a holistic approach taken for a lot of people. And most importantly, we need to have a better understanding, not just as a mental health system, but as a society, about what is empathy, and how do we actually approach these conversations? Because what I found myself in terms of niche is I'm in this place where I'm a funnel for the people that will not ever go back to the mental health system itself. They won't go back to therapy. They won't go back to a psychologist or a therapist or a psychiatrist, but they'll come to a coach that has the experience or the, I would say, life focused wisdom of what they've been through. And I'm not anything special, but what I am is someone that has the ability to tell people, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to listen to what you have to say. And when you have the ability to do that, you open up a lot of doors for people. You open up a lot of doors for people that have never had that door opened up for them. And it's a remarkably empowering experience for them. And I think it's the first step towards healing. Am I going to be the one that walks them all the way to the end of that path? I don't know. And I don't think it's my right to gatekeep that. nor do I think it's the mental health system's right. And I think we have to have a much deeper conversation about what that really means, because I think in many ways, the mental health system is a gatekeeper for a lot of people, and it becomes a really big struggle for a lot of people to actually utilize it to find healing when if things were changed, if rules were changed, or if operations were changed, emergency rooms were changed a little bit to kind of fit a little bit differently, I think a lot of good can be done. But it's a difficult conversation. It's a legal conversation, which makes it more complicated. And so it's a hard system to approach in many ways.
Well, talk about why you chose TikTok as your platform and how did you gain so many followers with the topic that you discuss of mental health and trauma?
That's a good question. Well, I've always followed a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk for a long time, and Gary was pretty adamant about TikTok back in 2019, 2018, 2020 timeframe. And I was kind of in a situation where I wanted to write my book. I wanted to also sell that book and get that message out there. I wanted to have more access to people. And all Gary could talk about was, if you don't get on TikTok, you're losing an opportunity. So that's I came home from Afghanistan in 2019 for my second deployment, and I started a business in March of 2020. And I was like, all right, I started a business. I'm going to write this book. And the only way I'm going to be able to get this message out there is if I start jumping out on TikTok. And so I started making short videos about mental health, talking about life, talking about, anything, talking about my own experience and what I had been through and what other people go through, and trying to just give people what I never had. And so I started that. And I think within the first month, I had like 10,000 followers. Within the first 2 months, I had 30,000 followers. And then within the first 9 months, I had 300,000 followers. And now, just over 2 years later, I'm over, over 500,000 followers, and I'm still going, just doing what I do. I've danced maybe twice in 1,500 videos. So it's not just a dance. It's not just an app for dancing. I talk about suicide. I talk about sexual assault. I talk about anything mental health related, anything, depression, anxiety, PTSD, trauma, war. I've even read some of my favorite poetry on it and gotten such an incredible response. And so, I just became myself on a platform, and if people liked it, awesome. If they didn't, I just kept going. And that's really all it is. It's just consistency of being genuine and being real. And I think that's what TikTok really is.
Well, talk about your book and your podcast. Tell us what people can expect when they read your book or listen to the show.
Oh man. Those are two vastly different things. I think my book, Defy the Darkness, is a raw experience of what it was like to be me, matched with, I think, my advice, for how to view the world through the lens of mental health, how to overcome those battles and fight back against trauma and not just let it own your life. It's a raw experience. That's the I think the best way to describe it. And it's a place for those of you who are really struggling with life, those of you that are really struggling with people, to start redefining how to step forward, and take those first steps into healing, and those first steps towards creating peace in your life and kind of ending the chaos of especially what trauma and suicide and all of these difficult things have to offer. While on the other hand, the Dylan Experience, my podcast, is It's a selfish venture, if I'm being honest. It's a place for me to interview people that I think are really cool and learn, because that's one of the things that has really helped me through the years, is learning. It's given me a way of consuming knowledge and connecting with good people that I just absolutely love, and I want to share it with other people. And so that's kind of what the Dylan experience is about. It's certainly just as raw as my book, and it's more focused on, having conversations about difficult topics, and yet learning as well, and being respectful about the experiences of others, and kind of having that ability to dive deeply into these subjects that are taboo, throughout our lives, that not many people talk about. And that's kind of what my goal is with the Dylan experience, and my book is to help people. So there's that.
Do you have any current or upcoming projects that you're working on that people need to know about?
Oh man, I never stop having upcoming projects coming up. I'm working on building a couple online courses for, that will kind of go with my next book, which is again another project. My next book is going to be somewhat different from my first one. It's going to be more focused on what I've learned from my coaching and helping people, and what is most important, I think, in the process of healing, specifically relationships, and how to assess them, and how to develop an understanding of how your identity was built from your relationships. And so I'm really going to dig into that aspect of life and kind of build around it. I can't wait for that to come out, but it might be a while. I'm obviously building the online courses as well. But I think most importantly, I'm having a little girl. I'm having a little baby in June. So that's I think what I'm preparing for the most.
Well, congratulations on the baby. I got 2 kids and they are great. And you will remember that moment when she's born for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Give out your contact information so people can connect with you, the website, how to listen to the podcast, the TikTok, so people can connect with you.
Absolutely. So my website's my name, DylanSessler.com. You can schedule a coaching session if you want. You can follow me on YouTube. Just look up my name, Dylan Sessler. You can find my book on Amazon. It's called Defy the Darkness. You can find me on Instagram or TikTok with Dylan Sessler, Dylan_Sessler. You can find me pretty much anywhere, and just Google my name and you'll see me.
Well, I just want to take this time to thank you for your service, first of all, and thank you for what you're doing for people. You probably don't know how much or something that you might say can save somebody's life. So close us out with any final thoughts, anything that I didn't talk about that you would like to touch on, or anything that you would like to say to people out there that are struggling with mental health.
I will leave you with this. The most important thing you can do for yourself is listen to yourself. And that's the hard part, is when you listen, you're not listening to your thoughts or your words. What I'm talking about when you listen to yourself, it's listen to what your body's trying to tell you. If it's tired, it needs you to slow down. It needs you to take a step away from the chaos. It needs you to express yourself. And when you start to become more aware of what your body actually needs and what your body's trying to tell you, that's when you're able to actually start healing. That's when you're able to actually understand what you actually need. Because if you don't listen to yourself, if you don't give yourself that time, you'll give it to someone else who will take advantage of it. You'll give it to work, who will use it for what they need. You'll give it to your family, who will use it for what they need. You'll give it to everybody else, but you won't give it to yourself. And eventually your body is going to take it's going to take it back in its own way. And I'm afraid you're not going to want to deal with that. You know, the body says no in many ways. It says no in physical ways. It says no in painful, hurtful ways. And eventually it won't work for you anymore because you weren't working for it. So listen to your body and learn how to appreciate yourself, learn how to take care of yourself, and learn how to respect yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sessler.com. I'd like to take this time to thank Dylan for joining us and ask you listeners to share this to as many people as possible, because Dylan he's doing a lot for the mental health of people all around the world. And you never know, something that he said could help save somebody or steer them in a more positive direction. Be sure to follow, rate, review, share this episode to as many people as possible. And Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store and download the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast app. Dylan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.